collapsed, leaving a gaping hole. This is right along the mountain pass. This road is a critical link.
Teton National Park saw more visitors in September than it saw in June.
Massive granite fractures shifted somewhere high above the valley floor, unleashing a cascade of rubble that instantly transformed the tranquil vistas of Grand Teton into a zone of silent peril. Officials responded with decisive urgency, closing the park to halt the march of danger. Entry gates that once welcomed adventurers and photographers swung shut under the weight of unseen risk. The decision didn't linger. It was abrupt and resolute, as they recognized the peril of geologic drama playing out on the mountain's face. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Visitors arriving in the calm of early morning found familiar roads blocked by official vehicles, barricades, and stern signage. A hush settled across the landscape, palpable even as cranes and heavy equipment remained on standby tucked behind tree lines. Nearby trails emptied with the suddenness of a thunderclap. The Exum and Owen Spalding routes, once echoing with climber chatter, now lay beneath high alert. Jenny Lake's placid waters mirrored a sky still uncluttered by concern, but beneath that surface, unseen dangers stirred in the fractured granite. Park management, informed by rangers and geologists observing fresh debris and intermittent rockfall, prioritized public safety above all. A massive section of the second tower, already a spot with a history of collapse, had shifted. Collapse had likely occurred over the 4th of July weekend, unleashing repeated cascades of unstable rock for at least 48 hours afterward. The risk extended beyond the initial tumble. The unstable face could continue shedding rocks without warning. With climbers and hikers drawn to the Teton's rugged drama, uncertainty in alpine zones required immediate containment. The landscape, once framed by photogenic serenity, now played host to a more primal tension. Each piece of dislodged stone whispered the potential of more to come. That threat reverberated through the valley. The carbonate slabs, shattered boulders, and tumbling debris were not just reminders of nature's brutality. They were signals of imminent danger, impossible to ignore. Shutting down the park was not a headline move. It was an urgent act of protection. Park authorities recognized that visitors, even well-equipped climbers or alert hikers, could not navigate unpredictability in the high alpine. The mass rockfall from the mountain's eastern flank had not only distorted the skyline but also undermined the very ground beneath common trails and climbing routes. The park's delicate balance between public access and safety tipped decisively toward caution. The shuttering of roads, paths, and ranger stations across the park signaled a protective pause. At trailheads where backpackers had queued in anticipation of alpine adventures, informational boards displayed urgent closures instead of weekend trail maps. Where rangers once offered route tips and weather updates, they now stood back behind caution tape, quietly turned to assess the shifting geology rather than point belongings forward. In the town of Jackson and surrounding gateways to the park, tourism shutters felt the sudden drop in activity. Shuttle buses turned off their engines early, and the rhythm of gear rental shops slowed to a pause. Guides rearranged their weeks, islanded by an invisible force on the slopes miles above. Those accustomed to summiting the East Ridge recalibrated plans. Those planning to photograph the iconic skyline, now forever changed by the rockfall, stood uncertain. The mountains had spoken, and all response shifted toward listening. Geologists now held the stage, studying aerial photos, seismic readings, temperature fluctuations. The role of freeze-thaw cycles became central to understanding the trigger, water seeping into fractures, cyclic cooling and warming, loosening crystalline bonds in the ancient metamorphic and igneous rock formation, elevated by temperatures in the high 80s across that holiday weekend. The Tetons, composed of gneiss and granite shaped over billions of years, remained a majestic moving structure, still responding to forces both slow and sudden. The closure provided the only route to protect both visitors and staff while nature reset its course. In less dramatic weather, hikes up to Hidden Falls or along Jenny Lake would be a serene morning choice. Now they lay waiting, their usual noises replaced by silence, interrupted only by distant shifts of rock or the rustle of high-elevation winds sculpting the edges of danger. In the ranger stations and regional field offices, the staff organized emergency protocols. Helicopter routes, often used in rescues, stood ready if further rockfall blocked trail evacuations or trapped climbers. Medical teams, already stretched thin by the busy summer season, now kept a cautious watch rather than active readiness. Even routine wildlife patrols gave way to monitoring geology, and signs of instability overtook the signs of animal presence. Temporarily removed from the busiest season in living memory, the park's closure felt like pressing pause on a symphony mid-note. The mountains, too often taken for granted as immovable, had revealed their transience in raw form. Hikers, guides, and visitors had come expecting timeless stillness, only to confront a mountain still very much alive and capable of rupture. Until the instability resolved, until geologists confirmed the mountain face had stabilized, the second tower stood secure and the risk receded. The trails, alpine zones, and roads remained off-limits. From the valley floor to rugged ridges, the shutdown drew a perimeter of safety around what was once a freely accessible wilderness. Beyond immediate safety, the shutdown resonated with deeper symbolic meaning. It reminded guests and inhabitants alike that the grandeur of Grand Teton is not a frozen tableau, but a dynamic, shifting force. Its iconic skyline, shaped by centuries of geologic drama, had changed in an instant, enough to demand respectful distance. For park leadership, this was a test of resilience and responsibility. They balanced conflicting needs, safeguarding lives while preserving the park's spirit, protecting its visitors without sacrificing the natural forces that define its awe. The closure, brief in comparison to the mountain's timeline, was a measured response to a living world's sudden tremor. In that liminal space between threat and reckoning, the park rested. It held its breath along with those who loved it, waiting for the mountain's quiet before allowing the return of human wonder and treks into its shifting heights. The day the closure took effect, the stillness inside Grand Teton National Park carried a kind of weight that was difficult to describe. Wildlife moved without the usual accompaniment of human presence, the absence of footsteps and conversation creating an eerie contrast to the season's typical activity. The moose and elk that roamed the meadows encountered no curious onlookers. Even the call of a distant raven seemed sharper, more noticeable against the sudden void. The park's roads, usually flowing with rental cars, campers, and cyclists, lay empty under the shadow of the peaks. Above it all, the serrated ridgeline of the Tetons kept its silent vigil, concealing the instability hidden in fractured rock. The section of the range under greatest concern was high, exposed, and deceptively still from a distance. Those standing far away might have mistaken the jagged summit for unyielding stone, but closer observation revealed subtle changes. Fresh scars in the rock face, pale streaks marking recent falls, and a faint haze of dust that occasionally rose with each minor shift. These were the signs that had driven geologists to issue their warnings, and that had persuaded park managers to enact the rare, full-scale closure. The Tetons are no strangers to rockslides, but the scale and timing of this threat made it uniquely dangerous, especially with peak visitation underway. Inside the headquarters, conversations shifted entirely to mitigation and monitoring. Specialists tracked seismic readings to detect vibrations that might precede larger collapses. Spotters with long-range lenses scanned the cliff faces hour by hour, looking for telltale movements. A dislodged boulder here, a widening fracture there. Small rockfalls, while minor compared to the initial event, offered crucial data. Each tumble carried clues about which sections were loosening most quickly, and how the force of gravity might act on the unstable wall in the coming days. While the general public could not witness the work directly, the level of coordination required to maintain the closure was immense. Every entrance point needed constant supervision, as curious travelers sometimes underestimated the seriousness of the situation. Rangers explained the closure to each group that approached, detailing that this was not a temporary inconvenience, but a protective measure against an unpredictable and potentially deadly hazard. These conversations unfolded dozens of times each day at different locations, each one an attempt to convey the invisible risk hanging high above. Helicopters occasionally passed overhead, not for rescue operations, but for geological surveys. From above, researchers could map the altered landscape with precision, noting where slabs had broken free and identifying stress lines in the rock. This aerial perspective revealed patterns invisible from the ground, fracture networks extending farther than initially suspected, and talus fields expanding in new directions. The data gathered from these flights would help determine how long the closure might remain in effect, though no exact timeline could be offered. The suspension of normal activity also altered the human rhythm in the surrounding region. Local businesses, from outdoor outfitters to roadside cafes, found themselves serving a far smaller stream of customers. Those who relied heavily on summer tourism felt the impact quickly, though most understood the rationale behind the closure. Conversations in Jackson Hole's shops and coffee houses turned to geology and weather, as residents tried to piece together what might have triggered the collapse. Many speculated about the influence of rapid temperature shifts, others about heavy snowmelt earlier in the season, and still others pointed to the possibility of deep structural weaknesses long hidden in the mountain. For the scientific community, the closure represented a rare live case study of large-scale alpine instability. While rock slides are part of the natural cycle, the ability to observe one in real time, especially in such an iconic location, presented both challenges and opportunities. The combination of public safety concerns and research needs created a delicate balancing act. Access had to be strictly controlled, but enough monitoring needed to continue to ensure accurate assessments. Teams from the U.S. Geological Survey coordinated with park geologists, sharing findings and adjusting survey schedules according to changes observed on the mountain. Every decision hinged on the principle that no amount of scenery was worth risking a human life. The Tetons have always commanded respect from those who enter their realm, and this event served as a stark reminder that the forces shaping them operate on a scale beyond human control. A climber might choose their route carefully, a hiker might carry all the right gear, but in the face of spontaneous geological collapse, even the most experienced individuals are vulnerable. The closure was not only about preventing accidents, it was about acknowledging the limits of preparation in the face of nature's unpredictability. Within the park's boundaries, maintenance crews turned their attention to less glamorous but equally vital tasks. With no visitors to accommodate, they could focus on infrastructure inspections, particularly near areas that might have been indirectly affected by the rockfall. Bridges, trail supports, and retaining walls were checked for subtle shifts or stress. In some places, dust from the rockslide had settled heavily, altering drainage patterns. Clearing debris from culverts and ensuring water could flow freely became part of the ongoing safety effort. This preventative work aimed to keep secondary hazards from compounding the main threat. At the same time, wildlife monitoring adapted to the quieter conditions. Without the constant human presence, animals moved more freely into areas they might usually avoid. This shift could be temporary, but it offered biologists an unusual glimpse into movement patterns during a period of human absence. The data could later inform strategies for balancing conservation with public access, though for now it was a side benefit of a necessary precaution. The visual transformation of the affected mountain face was dramatic. Where once there had been clean lines of dark granite, there were now raw patches of lighter stone exposed by the collapse. Some sections looked jagged and sharp. Others appeared as though they had been scraped smooth by the sheer force of falling rock. The new contours caught the light differently, creating unfamiliar shadows in the late afternoon. Photographers accustomed to capturing the Teton's classic profile would find the scene altered, a change likely to be permanent. As the days of closure accumulated, a kind of rhythm developed in the monitoring process. Morning briefings outlined the latest observations, followed by coordinated patrols to check perimeter access points. Midday brought helicopter flyovers if weather permitted, and afternoons were dedicated to compiling data for the next planning session. This cycle continued without interruption, driven by the understanding that any lapse in attention could coincide with a critical shift on the mountain. The rockslide threat also reignited broader conversations about the vulnerability of other high-elevation areas in the range. If one section could destabilize so suddenly, what might that suggest about nearby formations? While the closure focused on the immediate hazard zone, the event encouraged a more cautious mindset regarding routes and climbs in adjacent areas. Climbing organizations began reviewing their own guidelines, discussing how best to communicate risks that may not be visible to the casual observer. Even beyond the climbing and hiking communities, the event touched those with a more general connection to the park. Families who had visited for generations found themselves reflecting on their personal histories with the Tetons. For some, the mountains had been a backdrop to milestones. First camping trips, reunions, even weddings. The closure, though temporary, was a reminder that these landscapes are never static. and that the experiences tied to them exist within a much larger natural narrative. At the administrative level, the park's leadership faced the challenge of clear and consistent communication. Updates had to balance transparency with caution, providing enough information to explain the closure without creating speculation that might misrepresent the facts. This was particularly important given the scale of interest in the park. Visitors from across the country and around the world sought to understand why such a renowned destination had become inaccessible. The messaging emphasized safety and respect for natural processes, framing the closure not as a loss, but as a necessary pause in the relationship between people and place. Weather patterns remained a constant factor in ongoing assessments. Warm afternoons could accelerate melting and increase water flow into cracks, while cool nights might briefly stabilize them through freezing. Sudden rainstorms added their own risks, sending water coursing over loose debris and into unstable slopes. Each forecast was studied closely, and even minor changes in expected conditions could alter the monitoring plan for the day. The park's geologists, well versed in the seasonal rhythms of the region, knew that these weather shifts could be the deciding factor in how the rock face behaved. The scale of the closure, encompassing not only high alpine routes but also lower elevation areas, underscored the unpredictability of rockfall trajectories. A boulder dislodged at great height could travel far beyond its point of origin, bouncing and breaking apart as it descended. By controlling access over a wide area, the park minimized the risk of anyone being caught in such a path. This precautionary buffer extended beyond what might have seemed necessary to a casual observer, but within the context of rockslide dynamics, it was entirely justified. In quieter moments, those tasked with enforcing the closure could appreciate the rare sight of the park at rest. Without the press of summer crowds, the soundscape shifted to its natural baseline: wind, water, the occasional bird call. Yet this peace carried an undercurrent of tension, for everyone knew the silence might be broken at any moment by the low rumble of another rockfall. This possibility was never far from mind, shaping every decision and movement within the affected zone. From a geological perspective, the event was a vivid demonstration of ongoing mountain building and erosion processes. The Tetons, geologically young in the context of mountain ranges, continue to rise as the Earth's crust shifts along the Teton Fault. At the same time, gravity, weather, and time worked to break them down. The rockslide was not an anomaly, but part of this grand cycle, an inevitable moment in a story that spans millions of years. Yet, to those living in the present, such changes can feel abrupt and unsettling, especially when they alter a landscape so deeply ingrained in collective identity. In the surrounding valleys, the closure prompted reflection on the relationship between human activity and natural hazard zones. For decades, recreation and conservation had coexisted in a careful balance, each influencing the other. The rockslide reminded everyone involved that the balance is never fixed. It must adapt to circumstances dictated by forces far beyond human control. Future planning, whether for trails, climbing routes, or visitor facilities, would likely take this event into account, ensuring that flexibility and rapid response capacity were built into management strategies. The psychological effect of the closure extended even to those who never intended to visit during the hazard period. Knowing that such a celebrated space was off-limits created a sense of absence, a temporary gap in the shared landscape of the nation's parks. Images of the empty roads and sealed trails circulated widely, evoking both curiosity and respect. For many, it reinforced the idea that wild places retain their own authority, capable of setting boundaries that no permit or plan can override. As monitoring continued, the subtle interplay between stability and movement became the focal point. Some days passed without any visible change, lulling observers into a cautious optimism. Then, without warning, a minor rockfall would renew the sense of urgency. The unpredictability of this rhythm kept teams vigilant, ensuring that no false sense of security could take root. Each moment of quiet was understood as temporary, a pause rather than an end. The closure's reach extended into academic circles as well, with universities expressing interest in studying the data once conditions allowed. The intersection of geology, climate science, and park management offered a rich field for research, and while the immediate priority was safety, the long-term benefits of the data being gathered were clear. Understanding the mechanics of this rock slide could improve hazard prediction not only in the Tetons, but in similar mountain environments worldwide. For now, however, the focus remained tightly on the present. The park stood closed, the mountain watched closely, and the people responsible for both worked tirelessly to ensure that the unfolding story ended without loss of life. The grandeur of the Tetons had not diminished. If anything, their power and complexity had been cast into sharper relief. To stand in their shadow during this time was to feel the full measure of their presence, a reminder that they are both destination and force, beauty and hazard, enduring yet ever-changing. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Grand Teton closure? What do you think happens next? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.